Oops.
You're live.
Oh no, we don't want to have all the ARs in. Hi everybody. So welcome to our today's Green Solar Academy webinar. It's the first time that we are using Teams, so bear with us if something is not perfect. It's the second time that we are having a webinar about the topic compliance. Today the topic of today's webinar is compliance in practice. This time we want to pick up on the discussion that has been going on in the industry since the beginning of this year actually, and kind of what brought us to the point to make that the topic of today's webinar was actually the My Broadband article, Eskom's solar rules lie. And before we get started, I actually just wanted to say thanks to all our alumni, because you are coming to our courses and you grow our network, so that makes it possible for us to also organize that kind of webinars where we share information and where we invite experts from the industry and our green trainers. For today's event, we have maybe actually, no, it's not the first time. So we already had people from banks, but it's the first time that we have a PV expert in the room, which is not a green technology partner and not a green trainer. That's Frank Spencer. I would guess that maybe everybody knows him. So he is a pioneer in the solar industry. I was actually not aware that you already installed your first system already in 2003. And I always say, so when I started to work in the country, 2011, Frank was already there. So, and he's always there when one has a question. So nice to have you here.
Thank you,
And yeah, and then we have Lyndsay, an installation electrician who joined the green team a few years ago. He's one of our trainers. He's one of the trainers who also developed our compliance for PV systems course, a one-day course, which we also offer soon in Cape Town and Johannesburg. And we also have in the room Alex and Tsakani, who will facilitate. So your questions especially, whenever is something coming up, so you can pop your question in the chat, and in case I don't see it, they will make sure, and especially Tsakani will be kind of your voice. And she makes sure that we get the question, so that we get your question also to Frank and Lyndsay. Yeah, that's it for the start, and now I want to actually start with the first question, which maybe I would direct to Frank as a start, and that's like, why does Eskom require PV system owners to register the installation, and what is the purpose of that process? And I think that's the big question in the room.
Thanks, Antje. And yeah, I think this has been a hot topic recently, whether one needs to register and the need for the Pr.Eng, and I know that's what we're going to discuss. But I think this goes to how the distribution operators, whether it's Eskom or a municipality, run their networks. It's actually good for them to know what generation is within that network. And you might think that a small single rooftop system won't affect things, and that's true. But with the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of small systems being installed, this starts to add up and starts to affect the operation of local networks. And so, I do think there is value in the distribution system operators knowing what's installed, because then they can also predict, if they know there's so much solar, they can look at the weather, they can have a view of what's going to happen on the network, and any challenges that might arise locally from that. So I think there's good reason to have registration. Whether it is too onerous or not in its current form, that's a different question.
But isn't it weird, I mean, that it comes now. So I mean, isn't the basis of all the discussion the Electrical Generation Act from 2006, which was adjusted 2021?
Yeah. So I think we need to distinctly separate the electrical requirements under the Electrical Act, which has to do with health and safety and minimum standards and making sure people don't get electrocuted and that systems are safe and behave, to the broader operations of the network question. And so I think these are two distinct areas. And in the one, that's the realm of standards and the electrician and doing the certificate of compliance to make sure that it complies with the wiring requirements. The other is just to know what generation is installed within an area. And you say, you know, why is this new? Well, from an Eskom perspective, it's new because until recently they actually didn't authorize the installation of small-scale embedded generators. They've only just started doing that. And certainly municipalities going right back to Cape Town in the early 2010s, might even have been 2009, as one of the first Munichs, as part of the enablement process, did want to know what was being installed, and so had a registration process. So I think registration processes are not new, and there is a value. And it is something distinct from the electrical requirements for a CoC. Yeah.
So do you want to come in here, Lyndsay, or?
Yeah, no, Frank is 100% correct. Nothing has changed. The proliferation of solar and the fact that it's not known by everyone and it's now become such a big issue in South Africa has raised the flags and has raised the people that are maintaining the regulations or should be maintaining the regulations. So in effect, nothing has really changed. And as what Frank says is, this is mostly aimed at large distributors. And there is no definition or distinction between your smaller consumer, like your small homeowner, and your larger distributors. And that is where change is going to have to come to obviate this confusion that's existed in the market. And unfortunately, a lot of our mainstream media like to make quite a contentious heading or a headline and threaten people, and that's what gets everyone's hackles up. It starts the discussions.
But I mean, we know, as Frank also just said, and also the first systems we were involved when we started to work as training provider in the country, and we also had some demo systems. So already back then, so the Pr.Eng had to sign off systems in Cape Town, and it's also like total normal practice now in Cape Town that every system has to have a CoC, a Pr.Eng has to sign it off, and meanwhile actually a lot of things developed. So in the first days the Pr.Eng only ticked the box DC system installed, but now we have guys who are really experienced and go and check the system. So still, why is it now that it's obviously common practice in Cape Town, and everybody is crying and arguing and discussing in the rest of the country?
So I think, Antje, you've raised the third point there. Sorry, Lyndsay, you've raised the third point there. So you've got the CoC requirements, you've got registration requirements, and now you've raised the issue of whether, as part of that registration requirements, a Pr.Eng needs to review and sign off on the installation. Now, that also rolls back to, I think, the late 2000s, early 2010s, when we didn't yet have the updated standards and good practice, that municipalities like the City of Cape Town were wanting to enable embedded generation for small customers, and going that there is a health and safety risk here that's unaddressed. And unless we address it in some way, that risk could materially fall on us as a distributor. And so the solution was to say, well, if a Pr.Eng signs off and reviews this, then the legal risk falls to the Pr.Eng in terms of if something comes up in terms of health and safety. Can you hear me all right, Antje?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Yes.
Yeah. And the misconception, are we got volume? The misconception also is that the Pr.Eng signs off the installation. In a way, that's not true. The Pr.Eng signs off the SLD, or the single line diagram. And that is to say that the system, the way it's going to be connected to the network, and the way the switchgear and the fault currents, etc., that is what he's certifying. That's what he's checking. The registered person, who's the installation electrician, still fills in and issues the CoC. So that's a big misconception. Where there is a lot of challenges is an engineer might charge 2,000 Rand to sign this SLD and never even go to site, or an engineer that really goes the full tilt and charges 40,000 Rand because he believes that's worth his time. There's quite a big difference in practice.
Greg, you wanted to add something to that, so we can hear you actually.
Yeah, sorry. I unfortunately am speaking from an Airbnb without the best Wi-Fi, so apologies for that. And that's absolutely right, what Lyndsay's saying. And arguably today, it is debatable whether a Pr.Eng sign-off, certainly for the electrical side, is necessary or not. The point is, it's still legally required. Distributors like the City of Cape Town or Eskom in distribution under the distribution code are quite entitled to ask for additional requirements over the minimum or over what an electrician would do. And this is basically what has happened in this case. They've said, under the distribution code, I am, I'm quite legally able to ask for a registration process and to ask for additional requirements. Maybe that's a Pr.Eng sign-off. Now, the language in the distribution code does say it needs to be reasonable, and perhaps one could debate today whether it's reasonable, but you would have to debate that in a court of law, and I think, it could go either ways. The point is, it's required by the distributor as something they've put in place, as opposed to the CoC, which is done by the electrician or electrical technician, which is a legal mandatory process under the Electricity Act and required. So it's two separate pieces of legislation.
I think that's quite an important part. But Lyndsay, please add, and then I come to my point.
Yeah, we need to understand also that this is only if you're connected to the grid. If you're completely disconnected from the grid, then none of these so-called rules or regulations apply. And as Frank said, the distributor is quite entitled to. He could say, "Listen, this is my sandpit. You're playing in my valley. If you want to come into my sandpit, then you must follow my rules." It's as simple as that. We are getting electricity from him, and he wants to protect his network. His network needs to be safe in all manners.
And I think that's what I wanted to add, and that's actually also what I think what is a little bit not clear in all the discussions. So that is actually what you also said, Lyndsay, said that it is about the connection to the grid, and that the basis for that is the distribution code. And there is, I think, a lot of not so qualified comments and discussions about the whole process.
Yeah, I'd like to play devil's advocate and say, right, I'm the distributor. I cannot trust these 20,000 people that have suddenly climbed on the bandwagon and attaching their equipment to my network. So the only way I can do it is to take someone that I can hold liable for that. And as Frank said, that Pr.Eng is the guy that's going to viciously protect his license or his registration. Although we know in practice that doesn't happen. And also, again, small residential, a large commercial or utility scale, these are totally different sets of connections. And I was actually at an event yesterday where one of the suppliers said that our regulations, or the lack of changing or adoption of new practices, are actually stifling innovation. And this is an indictment, I think, on the regulator and the distributors, that they haven't caught up and are staying abreast and current with the requirements and trends in the country.
Yeah, maybe to round up that part before we come to the next part, is it maybe possible that Eskom starts now to enforce this because we are now close to 10 gigawatt installed, and it's just that we are becoming relevant with our industry, and they have to think about how to really integrate PV in the game. So I know that when in Germany we are kind of 10 years ahead of South Africa, so, or Germany is 10 years ahead. I always have both heads. I'm a German, South African, German, whatever. So it is in the renewable energy law from day one in Germany, so that all systems have to be registered, and they have to be like in a register which is available for the public, and the government is responsible to make that information available. But they just did not do it at the beginning, and they only started it in Germany. So when PV became relevant, is that maybe also a reason for that development right now in the country, in South Africa?
Frank?
Lyndsay, Frank,
Yep.
what do you think?
So I think there's something to that you know, generally legislation almost in any sector lags significantly behind innovation. So we need to be aware of that. In South Africa, I think it's certainly in terms of SSEG, which is I think the focus of our talking today. There's no doubt that Eskom has been lax to authorize or put in place a structure to allow for legal small-scale systems. And talking specifically about Eskom, many municipalities have done so. And until recently, like the last year or so, and yet there was a plethora of Eskom installed systems. I saw a number somewhere estimating between 20,000 and 30,000 systems, small systems installed on the Eskom network. And maybe that's even conservative. Now, that's a lot of generation that Eskom doesn't know about, so hence the registration need and can affect. And also, if it wasn't done right and you had many of those systems feeding back, you could lead to voltage problems, transformer failures, all sorts of other issues. So it is really important to know what's going in where. Because even if the load is reduced to zero, the systems were never designed to have load at zero. And so you can then have voltage problems that were not encountered for or planned for in the design. So, and hence the NRS codes, we're trying to make it simple to say, well, let's throttle how much PV can be put into an area so that we don't have to do extensive modeling to see whether we're going to have issues with voltage and whatnot. And so now that Eskom has tariffs for small systems and now saying, yes, you can legally install, they're now playing catch up because there's now all these tens of thousands of systems that are unregistered. And I actually think it's not bad what they're doing. They're really saying, look, we're giving you a grace period, clean up your act, register, we'll give you the meter for free, we'll do the registration for free. I mean, that's a value proposition. Yes, maybe you get caught out and you discover your system wasn't built to the right standards, and then that needs to be fixed. And certainly you are going to have to maybe pick up the Pr.Eng cost for that. But, you know, I think that's a small price to pay to get everything, you know, all the I's and T's dotted and the processes put in place. And I hope that there will still be improvement here. And I think over time there will be, because, you know, we're starting to see batteries come into the system and the abilities for you know, batteries to provide additional services even to the grid. And so hoping that soon, you know, Eskom might also say, well, there's all these batteries out there. That's valuable to me in terms of demand management. Maybe I can offer customers, you know, pay them to be able to use their batteries. And this sort of innovation that we're seeing overseas start to come in. But at least we have got to the point after 15 years of you know, waiting for Eskom to allow SSEGs to have that. And you know, hopefully we move positively forward from there.
You know, and Frank's now mentioned the word Eskom a heck of a lot of times, and he's right. This is what Eskom is doing, and Eskom is probably the more proactive of the suppliers, and what we're talking about is the direct Eskom customers. The municipalities buy the electricity from Eskom, so where you're a municipal customer, then you've got to go through the SSEG process or the registration process of that municipality. And that's where most of us fall under the municipality or the municipal supply. And that's where the biggest problem is and the biggest lack of management control. There are very few municipalities that are absolutely proactive. And I've had the chance to do registration at Mossel Bay, and my paperwork was done and completed in under a week. Cape Town is also very progressive. I don't work there at all, but I know that they're also very progressive. And you'll get municipalities that when you send them the message, the response is, what is SSEG? And that, unfortunately, is the very wide disparity between our 257 municipalities. There is absolutely no cohesion. And the safest way for them not to stick their neck out or take responsibility for something that possibly they don't even understand is to say, yeah, but that's what Eskom wants, or that's what the supplier wants. Let's just follow his rules. His rules might be totally different than what Eskom wants.
Yes. So, I mean, that's definitely a point. I just see we have a very long question in the chat. I don't know, Alex, if you want to, and the question actually fits to that topic before I want to come to the next one. So, or Alex, do you want to read it out? So, as you are the best English-speaking person in the team.
All right. This is the question. For SSEG, especially domestic systems, it doesn't make sense to pay the touted electrical engineer cost to sign off. I'd rather bump up my system or even buy a good-sized backup generator and get off the grid. The person says, my other peeve with this registration requirement is Eskom's plan to replace our current meters with smart meters, put us on a higher tariff, charge us the fixed availability charge. I, for one, have a prepaid Eskom meter, spend no more than 300 a month. Sometimes that lasts me longer. I have no desire to pay 300 plus for absolutely no use. Otherwise, I have no problem registering my systems.
And I think this is the fear a lot of the people have. So, and that's the discussions you see in the internet.
It's a very valid fear, and I agree with that question. I agree with those statements. However, I'm now the municipality. I'm the supplier. I've created a network. I've put a network down in your street. At what point do I say, right, you're not using my network anymore, I'm not getting the income to maintain that network anymore, so fine, you don't have to pay me, but what about your neighbor? I think there's some extremely massive challenges as a municipality or a supplier that's put a network down. But I do agree, if you want to climb off the grid, you should be allowed to do that. But I think your municipal bylaws are going to manage that, govern that.
Yeah. Frank, do you want to add
to
that?
And I mean, yeah, look, by all means, if you are legally able to leave the grid and go off grid and run an off grid system, and the economics compute, which I think in certain scenarios the economics do compute, then by all means, if you have the choice to do that, I fear that it's really Eskom rural customers that have that choice. I think, as Lyndsay was alluding to, in a lot of municipal environments, you cannot escape the charges to have the wires to your house. The municipalities have invested in that infrastructure. There is a cost to maintain and look after the wires and to bring the wires to your house, whether or not you use those wires. And so I think as a general policy shift, we're seeing all tariffs, and starting with residential tariffs as well, move away from the previous energy-only inclining block tariffs, which, again, if you built a solar PV system on that tariff, you could theoretically not buy any electricity from the grid, but you would still have the benefit of the wires. Now, I think this is what Lyndsay was also alluding to, creates a problem, because you're not paying for the wires that still bring you some benefit, but your neighbors now having to subsidize you because they don't have the solar system. So that's led to the drive to see arguably what's called cost reflective tariffs, where the fixed charges are getting broken out from the energy charges, and in fact, even to a time of use perspective. So this is what Eskom has done with their home flex tariff. Is yes, now you've got fixed charges and the time of use, but this is going to come to all of Eskom's residential tariffs eventually in probability, and also is likely that the municipalities will start moving that way as well. So we do have this planned policy movement away from energy-only tariffs to tariffs that are arguably cost-reflective, both on the fixed charges and in terms of time of use, also for residential customers. So, you know, and I think part of the challenge is whether these fixed costs and energy costs are actually realistic in terms of the market. And I think this is where Munich's and Eskom are running a risk that actually they're certainly Munich's still cross-subsidized from their electricity tariffs to other services. So they're making a good margin, if you like, on electricity. And you can see that in some municipalities where the tariffs are 2-3 times, you know, what Eskom is charging, which is crazy, and perhaps way more than other well-run municipalities. But and the same on the fixed charges side, and so this, you know, we are moving towards a scenario where going off grid is becoming viable for certain customers if they can, or becoming energy neutral. To be honest, I'm a reasonable fan of the Eskom Home Flex tariff because it's actually a bidirectional tariff. You could build a bigger PV battery system and actually pump energy into the grid in peak hours, or even in standard hours, and actually offset your bill. And you've still got to be a net consumer, but there's some value to that. And I also believe that eventually, you know, things will open up and you could be a net supplier to Eskom or the municipality. The reality is that, especially for the municipalities shouldn't care where the energy comes from, whether they buy from Eskom or buy from you as a home user. If you can provide the energy at the same price or maybe slightly less than what they're buying from Eskom, why shouldn't they buy from you? But then, you know, the tariffs need to be set up properly so that the cost for the wires are properly recovered and the cost for the energy is neutral depending on the supplier and the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is the whole development and the growth of the industry also depends on Eskom knowing where the systems are, and that's so. What do you suggest now? I mean, what should our installers, our alumni, do with their installations? So, what is the process? So there's, for instance, that one document, the embedded generation installation compliance test report from Eskom. Actually, very long word, could be German. Actually, it's a phrase, but it's a one term for one document. Actually, I only figured out that we have that in the preparation of the webinar. So because we usually say, so also what that we have the PV green card option, we have the CoC, we have the reports from ECA. So, I mean, what do you suggest for installation, that the installation really complies with all laws and legislation?
Yeah, I want to say straight that if your installation was done compliant and properly the first time, there should be absolutely zero cost to register that system, except for possibly providing some forms and that. The subject of the Pr.Eng and his costs, look, he's a professional person and he's entitled to charge a professional fee. The legislation or the suppliers, the distributors are going to have to wake up and say, right, for a system this size or that system or this type of design, we are prepared to waive the Pr.Eng sign-off for this and this reason. It's entirely stupid for a person with 5 panels on his roof and a 5 kVA inverter to pay $5,000 or $10,000 for an engineer to sign off an SLD, because that's all he signs off is the SLD. The system must still be compliant against the regulations and the Health and Safety Act. There should be the advice to any installer or any future homeowner is it's got to be done right the first time anyway. It's as simple as that.
And maybe to build on that, although I think to Lyndsay's point, it may be argued that for small systems a Pr.Eng sign-off is unreasonable. Today, it's still legally required. If the municipality or Eskom's asking for it, then unfortunately you have to do it. But what you can do is advocate for change. I mean, sorry, Andrea, I missed some of your introduction of myself, but I mean, this is part of the reason why for over a decade I've worked with the PV Industry Association and sat on the board of SAPVIA. and in being involved in the formation of the PV Green Card and worked on standards and argued with municipalities and Eskom regularly to try to move the needle on these matters. Right from day one, my argument was that a Pr.Eng sign-off was probably unnecessary for a small system, but I understood the rationale because at that time there weren't standards that properly governed this. Now our standards are much, much better, and maybe the standards are still not covering the mechanical installation, and there may be mechanical installation risk or other risks, structural risk, that's not assessed by a CoC that a Pr.Eng would assess. But again, maybe there's some work that needs to be done there. But from an advocacy perspective, it's get involved with the SAPVIA structures or other industry associations. SAPVIA is not the only one promoting PV, and try to work in the working groups to see change come, because I think eventually it does happen. I mean, and I've seen that over the decade and a half that I've been directly involved in this space.
It's actually a very good point. Maybe just to add to the SAPVIA part. So to those in the room who are SAPVIA accredited PV Green Card installers and who are registered in the PV Green Card program, so all of you are members of SAPVIA. So, and what Pr.Eng said, every member can be active in one of the working group. And I mean, I have been working in the Skills for PV working group kind of since ever. And I mean, it takes time. I mean, it's in an NGO, in the government, in new processes, but it's worthwhile. And we really can also change things. But to come back, and maybe then we can have a look at the two questions. Maybe Alex, you can have a look, because the one is very long, that we can summarize it. So I just wanted to come back. So what, I mean, I think we are all on the same page, at least the three of us, so that we think that for small systems, a Pr.Eng signing off is a bit too much and it's too expensive. So, but what is a small system? So what do you think? Do we expect that we get exemptions for small systems? And is there any rumor? So what is small?
I think the distributor, the supplier, has to develop that set of requirements and rules based on the complexity of the system. Inverters are NRS compliant, or should be, and that already puts a certain stopgap between the possible incorrect or wrong feedback into the grid. So the policy has to be developed. It has to be driven and grown. As it stands right now, there's too much confusion and no clarity on it, and it's caused some people to get absolutely worked up about it, and other people to say, well, this is going to be the issue. I'm just going to disconnect, or sue me. For example, I know it's the shorter question and it hasn't been read yet, but maybe you can read that question so we can answer it, because these two questions here are actually very much on the opposite end of the scale.
Okay. There's one here under the Q&A that says, I know City of Cape Town has approved list of inverters they allow on their network. Only grid-tied inverters. From your engagements with Eskom, are they likely to go that route across the country?
Should we?
So the City of Cape Town list is like saying there's a Lego list. It's City of Cape Town decided and got together proactively and put a list of inverters that they believe should be allowed on their network. That does not mean that they are correct or 100% correct, or all the inverters they've chosen are the correct inverters for the network. Let's hope that they exercise a fair amount of due diligence. But for everyone in the country to say the City of Cape Town list is really, to an extent, I say the municipalities and the suppliers are lazy. They should develop their own list or their own laws, or at least have it under their own banner with their own municipal heading on top. So, yeah, there are a fair amount of inverters, probably, in my opinion, on that list that shouldn't be on that list. But that's a completely separate debate, I think.
Yeah, I would like to come back to that, what is small, because Lyndsay, you gave us a very long answer, but you did not say what is small. Very political
Look,
answer.
Antje, to me, big might be, let's say, a 10 kilowatt system, but to another guy, small is anything under 1 megawatt or whatever. It's that definition is very wide depending on your customer.
So
Frank, do you want to come in here?
So I'm thinking of the cuff because I think, I think we will see definitions emerge, but we almost to as a corollary to small, we also want it to be safe, something that's safe, that's easily manageable, easily installable, doesn't have complexity risk or issues that could arise from multiple systems. So perhaps, and again, I've just thought of this now, perhaps one way to define it is a single inverter, maybe with 2 strings and under 600 volts per string. So something like that. Then you're working in the realm of reasonably low voltage, not complex wiring, not a space you can make a lot of mistakes. It's a single AC breaker from the inverter, and so it's a reasonably simple installation that could perhaps get you to a couple of kilowatts. I don't know. I would certainly say it's probably somewhere between 1 and 10 kilowatts would be my gut sense of where to define, probably towards the larger of that. I think 1 may be too small, but I mean, I think this is where we almost need to do some thinking as an industry, along with the municipalities and Eskom and the standards, to have a clear sense of what could be a small system that really could be well assessed by an electrician that wouldn't need a Pr.Eng because there's very, very little risk in there, and could be installed. Yeah.
Yeah, my personal feeling on a residential, if you want to get my personal definition, is probably around about 15 to 20 kVA, because no residential system should theoretically ever go over 15. That's just my personal opinion, gut feel. And I see there's a question here about registration for complexes.
Yeah.
And the user does not, okay, the question is, can you give some clarity for municipal customers living in complexes? The user does not have direct municipal account. How does one go about registering one's solar system? Again, here's my opinion. You don't. For the simple reason that you aren't connected to the supplier. Frank's smiling there. We'll see what Frank's opinion is. Your complex is buying bulk electricity, and your complex is selling that electricity to you through probably a prepaid meter. You're not at the point of connection to that site. And so in my opinion, the complex would probably say, let's appoint an engineer, an electrician, whoever it is that we recognize. I want you to go and inspect the system. I want you to make sure that this person has connected to this little mini grid correctly. But that's as far as, in my opinion, it should go, because the complex is a bulk buyer. Frank?
No, I agree with you, and I think it's so. If you're and this can apply to estates as well. So anywhere where you've got a reseller involved, or even a shopping center, where somebody's buying in bulk and then reselling to you at a different tariff, they are actually the entity connected to the grid who needs to be the authorized entity connecting the solar plant. So if you wanted to do the solar plant, let's say in your complex, you wanted to build a solar PV plant, you would need the permission of the complex, and the complex would need to authorize that, or at least, sign off the paperwork for the connection. The challenge comes in that I've seen this before, where complexes go, oh, well, I'll build the solar on the roof, and then I'll take the value of the solar and continue to, bill my residents or tenants exactly as before. And one could argue, well, maybe that's a little unfair, but that's a different can of, kettle of fish. But yes, there is additional complexity the moment you've got a reseller involved, because normally those downstream of the reseller are dependent on the reseller to authorize any solar PV system.
Yeah, I've installed some systems in rather large eco estates. We're talking quite a few hundred houses. They buy their electricity directly from Eskom. They also have an SSEG, but it's easy to work through. People are friendly, they're knowledgeable. They also want the SLD, they want it checked. And once that's done, they give you permission to install and do a quick installation. There's no registration fees, nothing like that. Maybe a bit of admin fees. So yeah, complexes, estates, guys, you can make it easy.
Yes, that's a good news. So there's that question from Karel Rautenbach. So Alex, do you want to read it? Because I think it relates nicely to what we discussed, and then the long one, I still did not have a chance to read it.
Hi, it is very long.
No,
And so,
the one from Karel. So it's that
yes,
I do know that the following is said.
yes, I
should
see
be
it. I
done.
just wanted to
Okay.
come towards the end where he said, when it comes to compliance and safety, having seen in practice that installations do not comply, how does a distributor ensure that their network is safe and the systems installed comply? Do you need more context or?
No, that's fine. I was
Okay.
expecting this question, Carl. Thank you. Yes, that is the problem. That's what I also alluded to, is that if it's done correctly the first time, under whose definition of what is that correctly done the first time? And that is where I understand where you're coming from, and I agree with 100% with you. And I think as a distributor, if I was a distributor or a supplier, I would feel exactly the same as you did. And until I can trust my electricians or my industry as a distributor, and not as a customer, I'm going to be very hesitant to allow you to connect my grid if you're going to be pushing something back into my grid. So yeah, if done properly, who's the judge of that? Good question.
I just
Does
want
the
to flag
system have a
that
PV green card?
well, that's, I mean,
no.
the PV green card was obviously envisioned as a way to not to replace in any means the sort of CoC process, but to introduce some additional quality checks and balances. But going back to the CoC, I mean, let's also note that it's not just PV systems that make installations unsafe.
No.
If your electrician does a poor quality installation and doesn't follow the codes and signs the CoC, it's still a dangerous installation with fire risks and all sorts of issues if grounding isn't done properly, if wrong size cables are used or whatever the story is. So it does, as part of this, go to the training and certification of electricians, because if the electricians or the electrical technicians are properly trained and do their jobs properly and issue a good CoC against good work, then you alleviate a lot of that risk, especially for smaller systems. But if people want to cut corners, then unfortunately, that does lead to risk. But then exactly, the electrician, if they get caught out, should lose their license for that sort of happening, whether it's a poorly installed solar system or a poorly wired house, whatever it might be.
I mean, Carl, your first paragraph also says, in my experience, the proliferation of PV installers not being even IEs are rife. 100%, but it echoes Frank's comment, is that we always refer to the contractor as pet electrician. He does all the wiring, he puts everything together, and then when the CoC is needed, the guy probably faxes it to him and has never seen the site. And yeah, sure. So this is a big issue with PV, and we know DC is exceptionally dangerous. But I can't see the difference whether it's a normal electrical installation or whether it's a PV installation from that perspective, from a legal perspective. Our inspectorate needs to be sorted out. If our inspectorate is sorted out and if our municipalities are doing their job, then we won't sit with this problem.
Yes, I just wanted to, I mean, we discussed the whole time, so the one thing is it necessary to have a Pr.Eng signing off the system? So obviously it is necessary because it's legal, it's a legal requirement just now. But if we would have an exemption for smaller systems, and if we see that all is coming from the grid code side, and that Eskom or the grid operator needs to know from where the electricity is coming from. So I mean, an exemption then could be like for the process, but still the grid operator needs to know where the systems are, right? Or am I wrong?
It's his network, aren't you?
Hmm?
If you want to connect to his network, you must follow his rules. It's as simple as that. And if he cannot trust the downstream process, the IE or the PV installer, he's has to bring in extra rules, and that's where I agree with Carl. You know, yes, he says there can be low fees, but yes, some engineers also gouge it. We know that this industry, no matter what industries, people will take a chance. But yeah, if I couldn't trust the people that work for me or that install stuff for me, I'm also going to make sure I need to protect my asset.
Topic is hot.
So Kani, your mic is on.
Sorry.
I just see that, so there's another very valid point in the chat here. So it's all good that we have to register with Eskom, but what if they not respond to submitted applications?
Yeah, well, now we're talking about a municipality also. Of the 257 in the country, very, very few have proper SSEG process in place. So yes, it's law, it has to be done, but if you do your bit and try and register, or at least put the paper trail into place, then that's the best you can do.
And it will come, huh? And I think this is also what we discuss in the courses. So in the 5-day Super Solar School, but also especially in the compliance course. So how to read the laws and regulations, how to be prepared, how to install like a legally compliant and technical compliant system. So because if the system is there, and I know I spoke with one of our trainers from Cape Town, and so he was approached from the city of Cape Town because the client actually, so that the system was not registered. So then he went there, and it was actually not a difficult thing because he had all the documentation, all the information, and then they got on the system. So, and I think that's the important thing, right? Or I don't know how you see it, Lyndsay and Frank. So that that we should make sure that the systems are installed correctly, even so we know that others don't do it.
Yeah, as Frank said, it's whether it's a normal electrical installation without any PV or an electrical installation with PV, the same rules apply. The same requirements and health and safety requirements apply, except now that the distributor's saying, okay, you're not just using my electricity, the worst you can do is trip my breaker. Now you're actually potentially going to feed back into my grid and cause instability, and that's why I've got these rules. We're not going to get past that until change of legislation or change of the rules to accommodate an exploded market, a market that exploded over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the challenge, I mean, there is a challenge because, you know, there is a difference between, well, how do I express this without, you know, there are legal rules that you know people have been expected to comply with. The reality is that people haven't, out of almost necessity in some cases, you know, with load shedding and whatnot. And you know, if we're honest, the Munich and Eskom, even to a certain extent, have turned a blind eye to all of the installations that have happened over the last couple of years. It actually was helping out that this has happened. But we're in a different situation now, and I think we're reaching that point where it actually is becoming important that the processes are followed properly and that the distributors have a proper understanding. So yes, the processes, maybe Eskom did start off struggling a bit. Don't forget, Eskom got absolutely swamped at the beginning when they opened the process, and then I think Carl made the point that the process is running much better now. And I think that's true even with the city of Cape Town. I remember in the early days with the city also, you know, having to follow up and, you know, and now that process is working better. You know, the fact that a process isn't working doesn't change the legal obligation. So, you know, if you want to take the risk and build the system and get it up and running and turn it on before you've got the documentation done that's supposed to come first, I think eventually there's going to be some pushback from you know, municipalities and Eskom on that. So I know that's common practice. Maybe it isn't best practice. I am hoping though that as the process get quicker and quicker, that becomes less of a problem. You know, your customer orders, you do the registration, it's done in days, you go and install, you know, and that's what we should also be advocating for, to push the municipalities and Eskom, which I think has happened. I think, we are seeing improvements. But I think also, to Lyndsay's point, there are hundreds of units that don't have any regulatory space for solar yet. They're also having tons of systems installed. So, that's also a challenge.
What do
I think
we as a panel think about outer or the other forums that are saying that we should hold on registrations? Contentious question, yeah, but what do you think, Frank?
I don't think it's contentious at all. I think you're literally asking people to break the law. So, it's you can argue all you like. And I mean, I've had arguments directly with some of the OTA-related people on this point, because they're saying that under the legislation, the minimum standards as required by, to issue the CoC are all that is required legally, and anything more is illegal. And that interpretation, I'm afraid, is simply wrong in my view. It's why you need to read all the legislation together, because it's not just about, the Electricity Act and the Health and Safety Act. It's about the Distribution Code and the rights that are given to distributors under the Distribution Code. And if you read the Distribution Code, it's very, very clear that distribution entities can ask for registration and can ask for requirements over and above what the minimum standards might be under other legislation. So I do think that they are wrong, and I do think it's wrong to ask people to break the law. So, yeah.
I think they're going to battle. Personal opinion.
Which kind of brings us to the point, and this is, Frank, you want to add?
No, I just want to say, and if they feel that way, so they may have an argument that it's unreasonable, because the Distribution Code does say that these things need to be reasonable. If they really feel so strongly that this is wrong and unreasonable, then they need to take it to court and argue it there, and let a judge decide whether it's reasonable or unreasonable. But until you have a legal opinion on that, you can't say, well, just because I think it's unreasonable, therefore I'm going to act, outside of the law.
So Manfred is saying that the application registration requirements are part of the process of enabling utilities to manage the increased penetration of embedded generations and their increasing impact on the grid. And I think that that's also a very, very valid point. So that's also what I'm, and what I think, and what is kind of the consensus in the room, at least from the comments and from the speakers, so that we have to prepare, that we have to get the systems registered. I mean, we are now on almost 10 gigawatt peak, but so we also want to grow the market significantly. So, and there's still a lot to do, but I mean, the operator needs to know where the systems are and what happens, and that's, I think, a given fact if we look overseas. So how things are done and where the problems come up, and this is definitely the next thing will be that they want to remote monitor the system and remote operate the systems. But so first baby steps, let's first get the systems registered properly. But so maybe one question which we got from the Cape Town group, because we're also coming to the end. So, and that's from the Cape Town alumni group. So what do you think? So what does the compliance landscape for South Africa energy sector look like in 10 years from now? And how does a contractor position themselves accurately to stay market relevant already now? So what do you think? Where is the journey going, in which direction?
So the dream, I think, is that we have this dynamic grid where consumers have become prosumers who can provide grid services. They can consume energy, provide energy, consume capacity, provide capacity, in a completely integrated system that values the contribution that even a small system can make. But that then comes to the whole integration and control, and so I think we're going to see more sophistication. I mean, it's already happening overseas. That's like, take California, for example, where grid operators can operate a fleet of small batteries and all the comms is in place to do that, all the protocols, all the control. And so I think we're going to see that probably being the piece, the next evolution is in the control and in the smartness of what systems can do and how they integrate and provide services to the grid. So, I think that's a space to keep an eye on, and, but I think a lot of these things, these revolutions, even though we're living through a solar revolution at the moment, it doesn't happen overnight. These things happen incrementally and take time, especially when you're dealing with municipalities and Eskoms and other big public entities. But I think, it's really just looking at what the international trends are and being aware we're probably going to follow that at some point.
Lyndsay, do you want to add? So
No, I don't have anything to add to that. I think Frank's covered it quite well.
so
There
have one
seems to be.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, carry on.
I just said that Amanda, an alumni from Cape Town, that she mentioned that Cape Town made it easier for SSEG applications by having a portal. It's a headache to sit on the phone with the municipalities for one application follow-up. And I think this is also a point, so that also was a comment from Matthias, our trainer in Cape Town, so that this was quite an evolution in Cape Town, and it was also like sitting on the phone waiting for things. And now they have that easy portal, so where the client has to upload, the installer has to upload, the Pr.Eng has to upload, but it works. And that's maybe also something, seeing for 10 years overseas, but I think, so if you have your paperwork up and running, and then you can, and if the municipalities are there, and I don't say that the city of Cape Town should be the role model, but they definitely do some things right, and it's good. Salga is preparing a lot of documents also for the other municipalities, and it would be very nice if they would
those documents were put into place many years ago already. The municipalities have just been completely lax in implementing them. Those documents have all been put in place. You go to the website sseg.org.za. It's a very good website. It's got a lot of good information in it. And that's where you can go onto the portal for the municipality is already connected to that portal, and you can start your application. But again, it doesn't help having it there if they don't follow those processes. I've got applications for City Power in Johannesburg on that portal that to this day I have not ever had a response to. However, that same applications or those same projects I have physically and manually had approved. So I've had to go the manual physical route, even though the portal application has never ever been attended to or responded to. So even the portals, as good as what they are, the municipality needs to take ownership of those portals.
Yes, I see that, Alex, definitely, and I think it will come. It will come. So, Alex, you have your hand up. I think you want to bring one of the questions of the audience into the floor in our last 2 minutes.
Yes, please. The question is from an audience member: what is the panel's view of larger systems, and here in brackets 1 MVA to 5 MVA, having compliance costs eroding the financial feasibility of the project?
Oh my goodness, that's not Frank. So you have 20 seconds.
Well, that's certainly not an SSEG system. And I think at that scale, absolutely, you need to have proper engineering work done. I cannot understand how that would undermine the viability of such a project like that.
It will be such
at that scale, it becomes
such a marginal cost for a system that size. It shouldn't even be a negotiable, no matter what that fee is. It's marginal.
And plus, don't forget, you're now also under the grid code, moving into a different classification of project, now requiring control from Eskom and integration and scale. So there's a whole bunch, of engineering work that probably needs to be done on projects like that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of questions, and we want to discipline ourselves, so Green Solar Academy, a bit more, and we want to have the webinars now in a frequent rhythm, like every 6 weeks, and I think that Tsakani will send a save the date in the next week. And we also have a look on all the questions we got and which we could not answer. And I think especially the topic compliance. So we had the last webinar in November last year, now again, and I think that will be a hot topic. And I mean, if you don't want to read all the grid codes and or the grid code and all the laws and legislations, so Lyndsay did, and not only Lyndsay, also Robert and some of our trainers, and they developed a compliance course, and it would be very nice to see you in the training. And Tsakani is the point of contact if you have any information, any questions. Sorry, she has all the information, and she will also send you an email about with a link to the recording and also some information about the course. And I think if we summarize it, there are laws and regulations and we just have to follow. And if we follow now, we save costs and headaches in the future. And then I would say thank you to Lyndsay, thank you to Frank. It was quite nice to moderate that event, and I think all of us enjoyed it a lot. Thank you, and thanks you also to the audience.
I'm sorry that there's.
Thanks, everybody. It was awesome.
I'm sorry that we didn't get to all the answers. There's some very nice, good questions. Ansha, I don't know if we're going to somehow try and respond to some of them. But yeah,
I would say we have a look and we make it so we will have the next webinar around the hot questions, the hot topics in 6 weeks.
All right, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Anything.